Ladies and gentlemen, we're pleased to announce the arrival of His Excellency Ferdinand Romualdez Marcos Jr., President, Republic of the Philippines and Commander-in-Chief, Armed Forces of the Philippines. We shall have the arrival honors.
Kalapunan, handa, dala, kalis. Tanghal. Ta! Kalapunan, mga pinuno at kawal, tanghal. Ta! Mga pinuno at kawal, baba. Ta! Handa,
The guests may be seated.
dala, kalis. Baba. Ta! Mahal na Pangulo, handa na po ang tanong panal upang libutin. Tanghal. Ta! Kalapunan, tanghal. Ta! Baba. Ta! Handa, dala, kalis. Baba. Ta! Mahal na Pangulo, tapos na po ang Maringal. Mga kasama, pinapabot ng ating panuwing panahal, Pangulong Ferdinand Romualdez Marcos Jr., ang Pangulo ng Republika ng Pilipinas, kanyang taus-pusong pasasalamat sa parangal na ating ginawad sa kanya. Sa hapong ito, baba, kalis.
Ladies and gentlemen, His Excellency Ferdinand Romualdez Marcos Our guest may be seated.
Harap sa kanan. Harap! Kanang balikat. Ta! Pasulong. Kaliwa. Kad!
A blessed afternoon to everyone. We would like to extend our warmest greetings to you all as we welcome you to the Armed Forces of the Philippines Change of Command ceremony and the testimonial review being tendered in honor of one of the esteemed leaders of the Armed Forces of the Philippines. Significantly, a military parade is a formation of soldiers whose movements are restricted by close order maneuvering known as drilling or marching. The military parade is almost entirely ceremonial. Those soldiers from time immemorial up until the late 19th century fought in formation. Mass parade also exhibits the apparent military strength of a country. Added to this, it involves the formation and marching of troop units, often combined with saluting, the lowering of the flag at the end of the day, the assembly of troops for inspection or display. But for the present time, military parades include all aspects of military drill, from an exhibition drill of precision drill teams and military bands, as well as an exhibition of military weapons when on parade. Most of the participating soldiers wear their ceremonial uniforms and carry the standards or colors of their respective battalions, regiments, corps, or academies. On this occasion, ladies and gentlemen, a parade is held in order to celebrate an important day or event worthy of remembering. Isang parada bilang pagpaparangal. This we extend as a fitting tribute to our honoree who influenced and touched many lives, and most of all, his vital contribution and role in leading the Armed Forces of the Philippines. Truly a dedicated and committed public servant who will be leaving behind legacies. On this occasion, as he is about to step down on his post, we show our most sincere appreciation. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for our honoree, General Andres Centino, Philippine Army.
Well, in a short while, we'll start off with the ceremony. We shall begin with today's ceremony.
You have just heard the sound of the attention call, which signals the start of the ceremony. Ladies and gentlemen, you are witnessing the entry of a division size of troops to tender the testimonial review in honor of General Andres Centino, Philippine Army. From the right side of the grandstand, we have the first brigade, which consists of the contingents from the general headquarters of the Armed Forces of the Philippines and from the Philippine Army. While the troops composing the second brigade, we have the Philippine Navy with the Philippine Marine Corps and the Philippine Air Force. The General Headquarters and Headquarters Service Command is composed of soldiers who share the popular concern for the sanctity of the constitutional processes and the safeguarding of individual liberties. They are mandated to protect the people and the state with the goal of securing the sovereignty and the integrity of the national territory.
The Philippine Army, as the largest branch of service of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, is responsible for ground warfare. Its mission is to develop, organize, train, equip, maintain, and sustain ground forces in support of the Armed Forces of the Philippines mission. The Philippine Navy, being the Naval Warfare Service branch of the Armed Forces, conducts maritime patrol to protect and secure more than 7,600 islands and more than 580,000 square nautical miles of maritime area of the Philippines. The Philippine Air Force, as the aerial warfare branch of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, is responsible for both defending the Philippine airspace and conducting aerial operations throughout the Philippines.
Over the years, as a global and national socio-political environment confronting our nation evolves, and in the process brings new challenges, the Armed Forces of the Philippines has devoted its energy in transforming itself, holding fast to still relevant traditions while shedding off those that need reforms. The AFP was once a force for independence against foreign powers and crusaders for the sovereignty of the Filipino people. But now, it is a vanguard for external security, bringing peace to Filipino communities across the archipelago and paving the way for an environment conducive to unbridled prosperity. The AFP has been the Filipino people's staunchest defender and protector from any threat, guided by the light of justice and law.
It has proven its commitment, dedication with compassion in protecting the people and the nation, especially in times of difficulties that beset the nation. Its soldiers are capable and responsive to extend their services in all areas of concern, be they in the communities, in the bondocs, or the countryside, implementing the ideals of the whole of nation approach. With the onset of the global pandemic, the Armed Forces of the Philippines has been in the front line to mitigate its effect. It has been working closely with partner stakeholders, continuously establishing partnership with private and civil society to help out in relief operations, backyard and urban gardening, extending medical support to include quarantine facilities for its soldiers, their dependents, as well as for fellow countrymen, and providing proper information and security for everyone to adhere with the IATF protocols.
The Armed Forces of the Philippines always reassures the Filipino people of its continued unwavering commitment and determination in moving forward and change to achieve the collective aspirations of our entire organization for the Filipino nation. It will ensure that the Filipino people will live in an environment of peace and harmony, secure the freedom fought for by our forebears and enjoyed by the present generation, and more importantly, help our government achieve its goal for nation building.
Anytime, anywhere, and whatever the situation calls for, the foot soldier, the airman, the sailor, and the marine will be there to serve in the spirit of cooperation to achieve peace, thus bringing progress and development in the entire archipelago.
Campanaw! To! Sampanaw! To! Baba! To! Baba! To! Harap sa kaliwa! Harap! Harap sa kaliwa! Harap!
Ladies and gentlemen, your armed forces, protecting the people and securing the state.
Mabuhay, and welcome to the AFP Change of Command and the Testimonial Review in honor of the Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, General Andres Centino, Philippine Army. This ceremony affords us to acknowledge his immeasurable contributions as a top leader of the armed forces. We are indeed fortunate to have with us President Ferdinand Romualdez Marcos Jr., President of the Republic of the Philippines, and the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the Philippines as our presiding officer.
Arrayed before us now is a part of the 143,000 strong members of the armed forces. The troop commander for this afternoon ceremony is Major General Nestor Florente D.C. Rayos, the commander of the Air Education Training and Doctrine Command, Philippine Air Force.
Tanghal! Ha!
Please rise for the presentation of command and honors.
Mga kapunan, pinuno at kawal, tugay kamay, na!
Thank you. Please be seated.
Baba! Ha!
The troop commander will present the troops for inspection.
Biro, handa na po ang mga samparaw upang libutin.
The honoree, the outgoing Chief of Staff, will inspect the troops. He will be accompanied by the military host, Brigadier General Romel P. Roldan, the Assistant, the Deputy Chief of Staff for Personnel, AJ-1 Armed Forces of the Philippines. Well, the outgoing Chief of Staff will be joined, of course, by the Vice Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, Lieutenant General Erickson R. Gloria. They're also joined by the Troop Commander, Major General Nestor Florente D.C. Rayos.
Our honoree, ladies and gentlemen, assumed the position as the top man in the military hierarchy on 12 of November 2021. From here on, he effectively guided and led the Armed Forces of the Philippines into optimizing its core competencies in performing its mandate, focusing on four main thrusts: on operational efficiency, enhancement of the AFP's joint operating concept was prioritized, which strengthened the interoperability of the major services in conducting internal and external security operations. Consequently, the Armed Forces of the Philippines conducted a total of 1,116 intelligence, maritime, and air surveillance, 262 maritime air patrols, and improved the facilities and capabilities of the littoral monitoring station. On internal security operations, the effective and efficient employment of various competencies of the major services led to the neutralization of 1,391 communist and local terrorists. The AFP was instrumental in delivering basic services and implementing long-term development projects all over the country through its convergence with the government agencies and stakeholders as part of the government's whole-of-nation approach to end local armed conflict.
On the optimal use of resources, our honoree oversaw the Armed Forces of the Philippines' strict adherence to the guidelines set forth by existing laws and policies on budget and fiscal management, and identified key priorities for fund allocation and utilization in order to accomplish the AFP's mission through the conduct of budget presentations and deliberations, budget review and evaluation, audits and inspections and workshops, and training for budget and financial managers in the Armed Forces of the Philippines units. In order to maximize the success of the AFP modernization program, he pursued capability development for the major services in order to complement the modern acquisition through joint exercises, training, and material upgrades. During his term as the Chief of Staff, resources were downloaded while upgrades of assets and issuance of those were completed through the AFP modernization funds. Moreover, in pursuit of improving the Armed Forces of the Philippines strategic basing, infrastructure projects under the Department of Public Works and Highways, Department of National Defense Tatag ng Infrastruktura para sa Kapayapaan at Seguridad program were implemented inside various camps and military reservations all over the country. To enhance the competencies of the AFP and establish stronger relations with foreign counterparts, the AFP participated in high-level joint training and exercises with allies and partner nations, which included the Philippines-United States Balikatan Exercise 2022, the multinational exercise Cobra Gold, and the multinational exercise Marara 2022.
Furthermore, the AFP during our honorary stint was deputized to ensure free, orderly, honest, peaceful, and credible national and local elections. The AFP provided security support to the Commission on Election in implementing election laws, rules, and regulations. In addition, the major services and unified commands also allocated personnel and reservists to support the PNP in law enforcement operations while sustaining military operations. Likewise, the AFP actively participated in various COMELEC-activated committees and task forces, such as the Committee on the Ban of Firearms and Security Concerns and Energy Task Force on Election. The AFP also supported the national government's disaster response operations in the aftermath of natural calamities and the COVID-19 global health crisis, providing disaster response teams, mobility, security and manpower assistance, aerial rapid damage assessment and need analysis, and assistance in relief and rehabilitation operations. Lastly, the AFP during his time continued efforts not only to prevent the spread of COVID-19, but also to help the community through the provision of aid for those highly affected by the enhanced community quarantine. Among these programs are the activation of Civil Military Coordination Center, participation in the IATF, task groups, the conduct of public information campaign, and providing support to the IATF. The AFP supported the campaign of the NTF COVID called the Bayanihan Bakunahan campaign by identifying vaccine deployment areas in the country.
Ladies and gentlemen, a big hand for the honoree, the 57th Chief of Staff, Armed Forces of the Philippines, General Andres Centino, Philippine Army. Please be seated. In a short while, we'll have the presentation of award to the outgoing Chief of Staff, Armed Forces of the Philippines.
Ang taong pararangalan at ang mga watawat, marap at pumagitna. Kab!
Awards and decorations are major proofs of noble acts, display of skills, competence, and excellence. The presentation of award is an acknowledgement for the exceptional performance rendered, especially in the military service.
Destacamento. Pasulong. Kad.
The award to be presented is the Philippine Legion of Honor. This award is being awarded to the officers of the Armed Forces of the Philippines for their meritorious and exceptional service rendered to the country and the Filipino people.
Mga watawat. To.
The Honorary General Andres Centino, outgoing Chief of Staff, Armed Forces of the Philippines, is requested to join the color detail on the ground.
Mahal na Pangulo, ang taong pararangalan at ang mga watawat, narito na pong lahat. Tanghal. Ha!
Please rise for the honors to the nation.
Mga pinuno, kawal, ungay kamay. Na!
Bayang magiliw, pers ng silanganan, alab ng puso, sa dibdib mo'y buhay. Lupang hinirang, duyan ka ng magiting, sa manlulupi, di ka pasisiil. Sa dagat at bundok, sa simoy at sa langit mong bughaw, may dilag ang tula at awit sa paglayang minamahal. Ang kislap ng watawat mo'y tagumpay na nagniningning, ang bituin at araw niya kailan pa may di magdidiling. Lupa ng araw ng luwalhating pagsinta, buhay ay langit sa piling mo. Aming ligaya ng pag may mga api, ang mamatay ng dahil sa'yo.
Kalupunan, pinuno at kawal, baba kamay. Na!
Please remain standing.
The troop commander will now order the troops for order arms.
Baba! Ha!
The invocation will be officiated by Colonel Daniel D. Tansip, Chaplain Service, Acting Chief Chaplain Service of the Armed Forces of the Philippines.
In St. Paul's language about the power of Christ to complete what he had begun, he wrote it well enough in his second letter to the Corinthians, chapter 5, verse 17. Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, the new creation has come. The old is gone, the new is here. Let us pray. O God, Almighty Father, be pleased to accept our supplication to sanctify this change of command ceremony in mutual support to the Honorary General Andres Centino, Philippine Army. We offer to you, O God, our gratitude for his opportunity of leading the organization as a soldier more than a chief of staff. Thank you for his being an emotionally giant soldier who gives even more to others than to himself. Clothe him, therefore, with the mantle of your divine influence as he continues his life where the Spirit blows and fully becomes the person whom you wanted him to be. Turn also your loving gaze to the 58th Chief of Staff, Armed Forces of the Philippines, Lieutenant General Bartolome Vicente Bacarro Jr., Philippine Army, a Medal of Valor awardee, and perceived to serve a fixed 3-year term as mandated by law. Under the impulse of your divine mercy, let him who is known for doing common things uncommonly well pursue the promptings of the highest desires of sustaining the reformation efforts and institutionalizing policies and organization. In a special way, we pray for the armed forces of the Philippines, as you, Almighty Father, have granted divine assistance in the many recent notable campaigns of soldiers, airmen, sailors, marines, and technical administrative staff officers. Keep them at pace with your divine protection. Guide them in all their duties of protecting the people, securing the nation. Finally, we implore your distinct benediction on the guest of honor and presiding officer, His Excellency, President Ferdinand Romualdez Marcos Jr., the Commander-in-Chief Armed Forces of the Philippines. Accord this presidency with your divine providence to restore faith and unity in every Filipino for the avenue to a future sufficiency. Let him find divine consolation in his spiritual acquaintance as he commands the defense sector to uphold the sovereignty of the nation, through which every Filipino takes delight in exclusive opportunities and sustainable comfort with your Son, Jesus Christ, and the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever. Amen.
Thank you. Please be seated.
The honoree is requested to come up the grandstand for the presentation of award. We would like to request Secretary Adelio Angelito S. Cruz, Presidential Advisor on Foreign Affairs and Chief Presidential Protocol, for the reading of the Presidential Citation. Please rise for the presentation of award.
Citation reads, Malacanang Palace, be it known to all men by these presents that I, Ferdinand Romualdez Marcos Jr., President of the Philippines, by virtue of the powers vested in me by law, have caused to be inscribed in the roster of Philippine Legion of Honor the name of General Andres C. Centino, Chief of Staff, Armed Forces of the Philippines, with the rank of Punong Comandante or Chief Commander, done in the city of Manila this 8th day of August in the year of our Lord 2022.
We would like to request Mrs. Sheila Centino, ma'am, to join the honoree and assist in the awarding. President Ferdinand Romualdez Marcos Jr. is now requested to present the award. While the President will be assisted by the Officer in Charge, Department of National Defense, Senior Undersecretary of Jose Faustino Jr. Congratulations to General Centino, sir. Thank you to President Marcos, to Undersecretary Faustino and Mrs. Centino. Please be seated. Well, meanwhile, there's a patch that being pinned on the award. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much once again to President Marcos. And once again, congratulations to General Centino. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for the honoree.
Ang mga watawat, sumalunan. Kab!
We shall now proceed with the change of command ceremony.
The Adjutant General, Armed Forces of the Philippines, Colonel Bernardo R. Fortes Jr., will read the relief and designation orders.
General Headquarters, Armed Forces of the Philippines, Camp General Emilio Aguinaldo, Quezon City. General Orders number 1159, published on 08 August 2022. Section 1, Termination. The designation of General Andres Centino, Officer 9851 Philippine Army, as Chief of Staff, Armed Forces of the Philippines, is terminated effective 8 August 2022. Section 2, Designation. Lieutenant General Bartolome, Vicente or Bacarro, Officer 9864 Philippine Army, is designated as Chief of Staff, Armed Forces of the Philippines, effective 8 August 2022, by command of General Centino, Romel Anthony Santo Domingo Reyes, Vice Admiral, Philippine Navy, the Deputy Chief of Staff. Official Bernardo R. Fortes Jr., Colonel, Philippine Army, Master in National Security Administration, the Adjutant General.
The outgoing Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, General Andres Centino, Philippine Army, will now give his remarks. This will be followed by his reading and signing of the order for his relinquishment of command.
With the permission of the President, may I remove my mask, sir? And with the indulgence of the President also, may I give the order Tikas Penga to the troop commander. Jal Rayos, please give the order Tikas Penga to the troops.
Ikas! Ha! Ikas. Ha!
His Excellency Ferdinand Marcos Jr., President, Republic of the Philippines, and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, the Vice President, the Honorable Sara Duterte, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Congressman Ferdinand Martin Romualdez, sir. Senior government officials headed by the Executive Secretary, Attorney Victor Rodriguez, sir. The Officer in charge of the Department of National Defense, General Jose Faustino Jr., the incoming Chief of Staff, Armed Forces of the Philippines, Lieutenant General Bartolome Vicente Bacarro, the Medal for Valor awardees, headed by General Arturo Ortiz and Colonel Ariel Quirobin, the former Chiefs of Staff of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, headed by General Benjamin Defensor, the Department of National Defense officials, headed by Undersecretary Franco Nemesio Mabini Gacal, senior officers of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, headed by the Vice Chief of Staff, Armed Forces of the Philippines, Lieutenant General Erickson Gloria, the family of Lieutenant General Bacarro, Ma'am Boots Bacarro, may I greet also the members of the Foreign Armed Forces Attaché Corps. Thank you for your attendance. Members of the Joint Personnel and Special Staff, commanders, chiefs of the AFP-wide support and separate units, the members of PMA Maringal class of 1988 and their ladies, please stand up. Thank you. Officers, enlisted personnel, and civilian human resource of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, soldiers joining us online, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, magandang hapon sa ating lahat. But before I proceed, may I greet my wife, Sheila. The days leading up to this moment have led me to reflect and look back on what has been a fulfilling career in the military and service to the nation. As a young lieutenant stepping out of the Philippine Military Academy in 1988, I vividly remember the security situation then in our country was significantly different from what it is now. Back then, the insurgents all over the country numbered over 25,000, while local terrorists, also numbering in thousands, scared with impunity our countrymen, especially in southern Philippines. Their influence reached and affected almost 5,000 of our barangays across the country. There were also 60 guerrilla fronts, which later on peaked at 49 fronts across the provinces. Partisan units roam in the urban cities, targeting our soldiers and law enforcers. There were major encounters against our adversaries as they almost gained parity with government forces in terms of capabilities. Little did I know then that 33 years after, I would be taking over the helm of the Armed Forces of the Philippines as Chief of Staff and leading the fight against this 5 decades-old insurgency and terrorism. When I assumed this position in November of last year, I had 2 main urgent tasks in mind. First, addressing the local insurgency with the goal of ending it. And second, ensuring the peaceful conduct of the 2022 national and local elections. I take pride today in reporting that significant accomplishments were achieved and decisive gains have been made regarding these tasks. In the last 6 months, the enemy's capabilities have been significantly reduced as 16 guerrilla fronts of the CPP-NPA had been dismantled, the highest rate in AFP history. Internal security operations have resulted in over 1,390 communist and local terrorist personalities accounted for. Of these, 29 were high-value individuals or top leaders of these groups. The local terrorists have been effectively confronted as no single kidnapping incident has been perpetrated in the last 2 years now. With the relentless efforts of our soldiers, 565 barangays have been cleared from the influence of these threat groups, paving the way for peace and development initiatives to take root. These gains are indeed instrumental in successfully implementing the Barangay Development Program, paving the way for the eventual achievement of genuine peace and development. As we claim these decisive victories, unfortunately, precious lives were lost during the period, as some of our brave and gallant personnel paid the ultimate sacrifice in the line of duty. And at this point, may I ask everyone for a moment of silence and pause for a minute to honor and remember the heroism of our soldiers who gave their lives. May they rest in peace. Nonetheless, there are reasons to believe that their sacrifices have not been in vain, as we are now on the way to reaping the benefits of a peaceful environment in most parts of our country. Moreover, regarding the completion of the second task, our participation in the successful conduct of the 2022 national and local elections was a litmus test of the AFP's professionalism and commitment to duty. During the 2022 elections, only 27 election-related incidents were reported during Election Day, significantly lower than the number of incidents in the 2019 and 2016 elections. The AFP remained non-partisan and stayed true to its mandate, as we ensured that the electoral process would be peaceful and orderly until the transition and handover to the duly elected choices of the Filipino people. We also take to heart the AFP's mandate to help fellow Filipinos recover from the risk and effects of natural calamities. For this purpose, the AFP have contributed much to the humanitarian assistance and disaster response operations in major disasters and calamities that hit our country. During Typhoon Odette, which affected most of southern Luzon, the Visayas, and the Caraga regions, in December of 2021, the AFP deployed over 7,000 personnel and most of its naval, air, and land assets to reach out to our countrymen and bring much-needed relief. Medical teams aboard our Navy ships provided medical and health-related services to our affected kababayans. The same effort of the AFP was delivered after the onslaught of Typhoon Agaton, which affected the country in April of this year. Our newly procured Black Hawk helicopters and C-295 aircraft were extensively used to deliver relief goods and medicines to our countrymen in these affected areas. Moreover, our soldiers once again gave their best in reaching out to our countrymen in northern Luzon to rescue and provide relief after the recent magnitude 7.1 earthquake last July 27. These only attest to the highest level of readiness that the AFP is capable of, always on call, primed to respond at all times, when and where needed. In administration, the AFP actively pursued the sound implementation of the modernization program by acquiring technologically advanced and equipped platforms and assets, while keeping in mind that these will only be efficiently utilized if our personnel are provided with equally top-rate training. We have strictly observed policies, processes, and procedures on the sound management and utilization of the AFP's resources, ensuring transparency, accountability, and in adherence to the principles of good governance in the process. Our capacity to build goodwill and establish and fortify our relations with partners and allies is also a key resource. We have leveraged these through the attendance and conduct of international defense and security engagements and defense diplomacy initiatives. On yet another front, in the field of international sporting competitions, the AFP is proud of the number of soldier athletes who have brought home medals for our country during this year's Southeast Asian Games. Our exemplary soldier athletes garnered 9 gold medals, 13 silver medals, and 21 bronze medals. This tradition of victory is one that must be nurtured and harnessed. We have likewise improved the morale and welfare of our troops. Through properly conducted and standardized procurement procedures, we can now proudly see that our enlisted personnel, including the privates and new soldiers, wear the same type and brand of combat boots as the Chief of Staff and senior officers. New sets of battle dress attire and athletic uniforms and dog tags for identification have also been issued to our troops. There have also been significant improvements in our communication capabilities. Very small aperture terminals or VSATs for communication have been installed in even the most inaccessible and far-flung areas in the jungles of Zapanta Valley, Pantarong and Colombo mountain ranges, and even in the wide expanse of the West Philippine Sea in Parola, Pag-asa, and Bugsok Islands, connecting our troops assigned in these remote areas with their respective headquarters, and more importantly, with their families. We have also conducted an inventory of the AFP's real estate properties and identified the number and value of AFP-owned and administered properties and lands. We currently have accounted for at least 290 camps and military reservations, with a total area of 191,000 hectares and a total zonal valuation of over 2 trillion pesos. This staggering amount of land and properties should also be useful for the Filipino people. As our new President and Commander-in-Chief actively advocates for the development and strengthening of agriculture as an industry, a number of these AFP's real estate properties and lands could very well also be utilized for this noble undertaking. Relatedly, the implementation of the Tatag ng Infrastruktura para sa Kapayapaan at Seguridad or TICAS program has resulted in a total of 524 approved projects, which contributed to the overall mission accomplishment of the AFP and the provision of shelter and workspaces for our personnel. With an eye toward the future, we have fortified the AFP strategic basing, setting the foundation for the development of permanent camps and bases for our land, air, and naval forces. This, in brief, is the state of the armed forces of the Philippines today. That much has been done, and the milestones that have been achieved are to the credit of the men and women of the armed forces of the Philippines. Their tenacity and endurance are the reasons for our victories, and the strong approval and trust the Filipino people have given to the AFP in the last decade. Perhaps one of the crowning achievements of the AFP under this soldier's watch is the zero reported incidents of human rights violations, a feat that we have kept going for a number of years now and serves as proof of the AFP's adherence to human rights and international humanitarian law. This undoubtedly lends credence to the high levels of approval and trust ratings we have received from our prime stakeholder, the people. Publicos Asia's pahayag for the second quarter of this year gave the AFP a 63% trust rating, first among all government agencies, and a 69% approval rating, second among all government agencies. For their bravery and their commitment, I am most grateful. It will always be my greatest honor to serve with every one of our more than 155,000 active personnel. You are truly the strength and the driving force of the armed forces of the Philippines. I turn over command of the armed forces that is determined and dedicated to securing peace and paving the way for progress and a better future for every Filipino. To our current officer in charge of the Department of National Defense, Honorable Jose Faustino Jr., having been a soldier and commander, I know that the concerns and prospects of the AFP will be handled with insight and vision. To my successor, Lieutenant General Bartolome Vicente Bacarro, your record of service and uncommon valor will no doubt inspire the men and women of the AFP to do better and more under your leadership. May you be blessed with courage, clarity, and wisdom as you lead our soldiers, airmen and women, sailors and Marines in realizing our collective goal of becoming a world-class organization and a pride of our people. I am sure that I'm turning over a disciplined, professional, and capable armed forces to you. And sir, I wish you all the best. To our President, Commander-in-Chief, His Excellency President Ferdinand Romualdez Marcos Jr., the AFP expresses immense gratitude for you in gracing us with your presence today. I am certain that the men and women of the AFP, starting from when you assumed the presidency, look forward to serving the country under your leadership. And sir, may I thank you for the privilege of serving under you as the Chief of Staff in the first few days of your administration. I joined the AFP as a cadet with passion and vigor at the time when your late father was the president. And now I am leaving the same organization with pride and honor during your time. To appraise you of the AFP's latest achievements and to hopefully set the stage for you as the Commander-in-Chief of all the armed forces of the Philippines, kindly accept this humble contribution, this book, which is my tour of duty report as the 57th Chief of Staff of the AFP. Muli, Mr. President, maraming salamat po at hangad naming lahat sa sandatahang lakas ang makatulong at makapagsilbi sa bayan kasama ninyo para sa Pilipinas nating mahal. Lastly, allow me to express my deepest gratitude to those who have been part of my life as a soldier, commander, and leader. To our former President and Commander-in-Chief, President Rodrigo Roa Duterte, I am thankful for the opportunity, trust, and confidence you gave me to lead the armed forces of the Philippines. More importantly, the many ways that you provide for the morale and welfare of the soldiers have made a difference that will always be remembered. Maraming salamat, sir. To former Secretary of National Defense, the Honorable Delphine Lorenzana, it has been an honor serving under your guidance and leadership. Your sound judgment, sharp insights on defense and security, and indomitable skill in navigating our security landscape have truly been inspiring and worthy of emulation. More power to you, sir. To those that I've worked with, my senior officers, my mentors, my colleagues and contemporaries, my upperclassmen, my underclassmen, and fellow soldiers, thank you for the experiences that we shared and for the camaraderie and companionship all these years. To my PMA classmates, thank you for the gift of genuine friendship. And thank you for celebrating with me my wins and cheering me on, most especially on occasional setbacks. May I also thank the staff from the General Headquarters, the major service commanders, the field commanders who are here today and joining us online. Thank you for your commitment to our task, dedication to duty, and the unwavering support during my stint as the Chief of the AFP. Ako'y magpapasalamat din sa ating mga kawal na nandun sa mga malalayong lugar, the far-flung detachments. My visits to you ensured that I am inspired and motivated to do my best in my work here at the General Headquarters. To my departed parents, the late Lieutenant Colonel Flaviano Sr., an Army officer, and Araceli, a school teacher and probation officer. Thank you for rearing me the way you did and raising an obedient son. How I really wish that you could have been here, see me conclude and finish what you have told me, to serve the people, just like you, being public servants. I just pray that the son of yours has made you both proud. To my siblings, Sandra, Ivan, Rachel, and Christine, and Jojo and Silene, who are here, thank you for the unceasing support no matter what the circumstances are. I could not have reached to finish my work without your constant advices and unending help and assistance. I thank most especially those I hold closest to my heart, my family. To my wife, Sheila, sons Bugsy, Rocky, Dion, and Adi. It is from you that I have drawn strength all these years. Thank you for understanding that my life in the service, duty always comes first. To Sheila, how can I ever measure your love and sacrifice in making a home for our family? Mostly tending to our children's needs alone in the home front, raising them to be sensible and responsible persons while I was away. You have been my anchor, my compass, and my inspiration all these times. To my children, I am sorry for missing out on important milestones in your lives because of my work, but I am really appreciative of your understanding and unconditional support and boundless love nonetheless. I will promise to make it up in the coming days, and in the next chapter of our lives, I know there will be time and opportunities to make better memories. I love you all. And lastly, I thank God, the Almighty Father, the architect of all, for designing my life in the way sometimes difficult for me to comprehend. I thank God for all the blessings given me, and I will continue to pray that He will include me and my family in His grand plans. And as I take off my military uniform soon, the soldier and public servant in me will always remain loyal and supportive, cheering on the armed forces of the Philippines as it strives to achieve and exceed in the years to come. Sa uli, mga kasama kong kawal, tanggapin ninyo ang saludo ng isang sundalong lubos na nagpapasalamat sa pagkakataong makapaglingkod at mamuno na walang katapat sa sandatahang lakas ng Pilipinas. Mabuhay tayong lahat. Maraming salamat po.
Sampanaw! Da!
Please be seated.
At this juncture, the outgoing Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces of the Philippines will now read and sign the order for his relinquishment of command.
General Headquarters, Armed Forces of the Philippines, Camp General Emilio Aguinaldo, Quezon City, 08 August 2022. Relinquishment Order. General Orders Number 1159, pursuant to Section 1, Paragraph 1, dated 8 August 2022. I hereby relinquish my duties and responsibilities as the Chief of Staff, Armed Forces of the Philippines, effective this date, and I sign in your presence.
The outgoing Chief of Staff will order the AFP Sergeant Major, First Chief Master Sergeant Rogelio O. Obilio to hold down his personal flag.
First Chief Master Sergeant Emilio, please lower and flag.
The change of command ceremony this afternoon affords us to share with our guests and colleagues in the government service one of the armed forces of the Philippines' customs and traditions. For the outgoing Chief of Staff, as he relinquishes his duties and responsibilities to his successor, one of his last orders is the lowering of his personal flag.
The encased personal flag of the outgoing Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces of the Philippines will now be presented by the AFP Sergeant Major.
The incoming Chief of Staff, Armed Forces of the Philippines, Lieutenant General Bartolome Vicente O. Bacarro, will read and sign the order for his assumption of command.
General Headquarters, Armed Forces of the Philippines, Camp General Emilio Aguinaldo, Quezon City, dated 08 August 2022. Assumption Order. General Orders Number 1159, pursuant to Section 2, Paragraph 1, dated 08 August 2022, I hereby assume the duties and responsibilities as the Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, effective this date, and in your presence I sign.
We shall now witness the handover of the command symbol to be presided by President Ferdinand Romualdez Marcos Jr.
The handover of the command symbol signifies the relinquishment of the incumbent and the acceptance of the incoming commander of the duties and responsibilities that go with the position being handed over. With saber being the command symbol, it characterizes responsibility, which is usually associated with the military leadership in warfare. Saber is also a representation of trustworthiness and steadfastness. Congratulations and thank you very much, sirs.
The new Chief of Staff, Armed Forces of the Philippines, Lieutenant General Bartolome Vicente Orpilla Bacarro, will now give his first order to raise his personal flag, after which he delivers his remarks.
For the new Chief of Staff, one of his first orders is the raising of his personal flag. This represents that he is now in command of the Armed Forces of the Philippines.
With the permission of the presiding officer, may I be allowed to remove my mask? And at the same time, give the troops tikas pahinga. Troop Commander, please give our troops tikas pahinga.
Tikas! Ha! No, tikas. Ha!
His Excellency Ferdinand Romualdez Marcos Jr., President of the Republic of the Philippines and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, Vice President Sara Zimmerman Duterte Carpio, Congressman Ferdinand Martin Gomez Romualdez, Speaker of the House of Representatives, Senior Undersecretary Jose Kalingasan Faustino Jr., Officer in charge of the Department of National Defense, and wife Joy, Malacanang officials present, the Executive Secretary Victor Rodriguez, Mr. Antonio Ernesto Florendo Lagdameo Jr., Special Assistant to the President, Secretary Roman A. Felix, Presidential Advisor on Military and Police Affairs, Secretary Maria Sinaida Benedicto Angpin, Presidential Management Staff, Congressman Harry Angpin, General Andres Centino, Philippine Army, the 57th Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces of the Philippines and wife, Ma'am Sheila, together with their children, Anthony Rex, Rafael Andrew, Dion, Adrian. Department of National Defense officials headed by Undersecretary Franco Nemesio Gacal, USEC for Civil, Veterans, and Retiree Affairs. Police Lieutenant General Rodolfo Asurin, Chief of the Philippine National Police, and wife Mary Grace. Coast Guard Admiral Artemio M. Abu, Commandant of the Philippine Coast Guard. Secretary Gilberto Eduardo Gerardo Cuanco Chidoro, the 25th Secretary of National Defense. Former AFP Chief of Staffs, led by General Benjamin Defensor, Jr., Philippine Air Force. Allow me to read the names of the former Chief of Staff here now present. We also have Secretary Hermogenes Esperon Jr. and wife Doctora Lorna, Ambassador Alexander Riano, General Victor S. Brado, General Ricardo S. Bisaya, Secretary Eduardo Manhan Año and wife Ma'am Jean, Secretary Carlito Galvez, Presidential Advisor to Peace and Reconciliation Unit, General Noel Segovia Clement, General Filimon Santos, General Gilbert Italia Gapay, and General Cirilito Sobihana. Officers and men of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, led by Lieutenant General Erickson Roque Gloria, the Vice Chief of Staff, and wife Jeline. Major Service Commanders, Lieutenant General Romeo Browner of the Philippine Army, Vice Admiral Luis Bordado, the Flag Officer in Command of the Philippine Navy, Lieutenant General Conor Anthony Canlas of the Philippine Air Force. Our operational commanders, unified commanders present, we have Lieutenant General Ernesto Torres, the Commander of Northern Luzon Command, and wife Banji, Lieutenant General Alfredo Valderrama Rosario, Commander of the Western Mindanao Command, and wife Lorna, Lieutenant General Robert Daos, Commander of Viscom, Lieutenant General Greg Almirol, Commander of Ismincom, Brigadier General Marceliano Chopilo, the Commander of Joint Task Force NCR and now Chief ISAF, and the Commander of the Special Operations Command, Major General Francisco Felicidario. And may I also greet awardees of the Medal for Valor. We have Colonel Ariel Quirubin of the Philippine Navy Marines, Colonel Herbert Dilag, Lieutenant General Arturo Ortiz, and General Cirilito Sobihana. Members of the Foreign Attaché present, First Chief Master Sergeant Rogelio Obilio, the AP Sergeant Major, members of the Joint Personnel Special Staff, commanders, chiefs of AP-wide service support units, members of PMA class Maringal of 1988 and their ladies, and of course, before I forget, my family, my wife Boots, and my children, Arnold Wilfred, Tracy Kathleen, Jerome, and of course, my extended family who are there right now. By the grace of God, we would not be here today. So it is fitting that I start my remarks by expressing my deepest gratitude to those who have shared my life's journey. First is to the Almighty for His continuing love and blessing to me and my family. To my parents, my late father Arnold and mother Teresita. When I got my first star, my mother told me, "Bob, masaya na ang daddy mo at pwede na akong sumunod sa kanya." And I said, "No. For better things are yet to come." And today, I am happy to be able to share this moment with my mother. Ma, please. Ma, this is for you and for Dad. To my wife, Boots, since my appointment was announced last August 1, we have had a foresight of what our lives would be in the coming years. I want to thank you in advance for the continuing support and for the sacrifices you and our children, Arwie, Tracy, and Piolo, will make over the coming days so that I can serve our country in the most meaningful way I can master. I shall find inspiration on you and the things that you do for me. To the other members of my family, my younger siblings, Jerome, Indira, and Golda, my second mother, my auntie, Auntie Elisa, my in-laws, Mama Sol, Daddy Fred, Ate Jing, Ate Will, Ate Edith, Kuya Wilson, and my nephew Jasper, and my cousins Manang Bona and Manang Buddy. Thank you for being here, and thank you for being there and taking care of my family during the times that I was away. To Executive Secretary Attorney Vic Rodriguez, former Secretary of National Defense Gibo Chudoro, Mr. Ben Carandang, Attorney Nilo Divina, Mr. June Santos, and Ma'am Beck Avelino, and my classmates from the PMA Maringal class of 1988, maraming salamat sa suporta at tiwala na ginawad ninyo sa akin. I have been privileged to have served with some of our military's best and finest commanders. Retired Lieutenant General Edgardo Batenga, former USEC of the Department of National Defense, former Vice Chief of Staff, AFP, Lieutenant General Ismael Villarreal, former Flag Officer in Command of the Philippine Navy, Vice Admiral Eduardo Maria Santos, former Chief of Staff, General Generoso Senga, former Secretary of the Interior and Local Government, General Eduardo Año, former National Security Advisor, General Hermogenes Esperon, and former Superintendent of PMA, now Mayor of Rodriguez Rizal, retired Lieutenant General Romy Evangelista. I am in large part of the officer that I am today because each of you challenged me to be the best that I could be. To the Department of National Defense Officer in Charge, retired General, now Senior USEC, Jose Kalingasan Po Senior Jr. Sir, as always, thank you for having my back. Having been in this position yourself, you would understand more than anyone else the challenges this office brings. To my predecessor, General Andres Centino, Mr. Thank you for paving the way. I know that any accomplishment I make will be built upon the foundations you have established and those predecessors that we have. Maraming salamat. There are many others who remain unnamed today, but to whom I owe an undying gratitude for having stood by me during my darkest hours. Those who believed in me during challenging times. The faith and trust you had in me was, and still is, a priceless gift that I will cherish for the rest of my life. I do not have the luxury of thanking everyone today, but I would like you to know that each of you have left an imprint in my life. Whether it was profound or fleeting, it helped me shape the man I have become. Finally and foremostly, I would like to thank our Commander-in-Chief, His Excellency President Ferdinand Romualdez Marcos Jr., for giving me the opportunity to take the helm of the Armed Forces of the Philippines. Sir, I will not take this responsibility lightly. I am fully aware that the challenges that would beset me will be undaunting, but your trust and confidence will remind me to keep faith on your vision for this country. Having accepted the challenge of being charged of executing and prescribing the directions towards attaining the long for peace for our country, I would like to share my vision for the Armed Forces of the Philippines, which I consider a shared responsibility for all of us. As a memory peg, I have used the President's call for unity as an acronym for my own priority thrust as Chief of the Staff of the Armed Forces of the Philippines. U, for unparalleled professionalism. N, for noble utilization of our resources. I, for invigorating capability development. T, for tenacity in sustaining our gains. And Y, for yearning for service excellence. First, letter U, for unparalleled professionalism. Across our ranks, we have been steadily increasing our approval and trust ratings, 69% and 63% respectively, as earlier mentioned by the immediate former Chief of Staff. The Filipino people have realized that the Armed Forces of the Philippines has become a significant, formidable, and reliable force that can respond when and where it is needed. We have proven ourselves worthy of their trust and confidence, not only in combat operations but in other areas of engagements as well. Moreover, we have displayed tact, resilience, and proper decorum amidst attempts to discredit our efforts. Thus, let us sustain our current level of discipline and our strict adherence to the rule of law, two elements that have helped us gain the respect of our countrymen. Further, let us strive to maintain, if not to surpass, our ability to be more effective and credible defenders of our country. Second, letter N, for the noble utilization of resources. Given our country's continuing struggle to overcome the health, economic, and political effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, no one can deny that our government resources are currently stretched to the limit. The challenge for us is to meet our objectives and successfully accomplish our missions with what was allocated to us. The judicious use of our resources will enable us to stay mission-oriented. This raises a simple matter of economics to the level of honor, honesty, and uprightness. In other words, the noble utilization of our resources. Over the years, we have endeavored and succeeded in prioritizing and optimizing our resources, personnel, financial, and logistics. But I am especially keen to view time as a resource. For me, time is a highly valuable commodity. Time that is wasted can never be reallocated, neither can it be renewed. In a mission-oriented field such as the armed forces, time is always of the essence. Time wasted is opportunity lost. By putting a high premium on time, we can effectively manage all our resources better. We have to develop the ability to determine emergent as well as immediate needs so that we can maximize our resources with a careful eye on the movement of the clock. Third, letter I, for invigorating capability development. Aligned with our modernization efforts, we will carefully monitor our acquisition based on upgrade tranche. We will facilitate these new and upcoming capabilities, ensuring that the delivery and related processes are followed to the dot. And in the same manner, we will endeavor to continue forwarding the Self-Reliance Defense Posture Program to make the armed forces par with nations in our region. Through this, we shall be one of the many faces of national strength that our Commander-in-Chief has emphasized. Attaining this minimum credible defense posture will allow us to adapt more quickly and discover new techniques to help us deliver services that are geared towards attaining peace and protecting the sovereignty of our country. Fourth, letter T, for tenacity in sustaining our gains. Over the last decades, we have made great strides in addressing the various external and internal threats to our people and our country. We must not squander these gains. Rather, we should tenaciously preserve and sustain these gains. Moreover, we will be unyielding in ending the insurgency that has plagued our people and fueled poverty in the various sectors of our society. Over the years, we have seen the value of collaboration in curing the ills of our nation. The AFP will continue strengthening its partnership with our peace stakeholders. This has been especially effective in ending local communism and even in the battling of the coronavirus. Finally, we will pursue targets against terrorism that has disrupted the normal and peaceful lives of our fellow Filipinos in affected areas. Lastly, letter Y, for yearning for service excellence. Just as professionalism is an outward manifestation of one's internal discipline, the yearning for excellence in service springs from a personal commitment to be the best that one can be, to give the best of one's abilities. This yearning is internally motivated. You, every member of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, must want to serve our people and our country excellently. There is no room for mediocre service here. This brings to mind two of the principles that have not only guided me in my military career, but also in my personal pursuits. First is my personal mantra: do common things uncommonly well. Routinary things may seem inconsequential and ordinary. It is easy to get into the habit of thinking that day-to-day activities do not make much of a difference in accomplishing our higher goals as members of the Armed Forces of the Philippines. I believe that, on the contrary, it is these rhythms of daily life in the military that grease the levers that make the AFP a potent force for good, for the preservation of peace, for the pursuit of justice, and for the protection of our country's sovereignty. As I said earlier, I consider the responsibilities I took as Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces of the Philippines as a shared responsibility for all of us. I will be the first one to say, I cannot do this alone. Each member of the organization has a vital role to play in achieving the vision and mission of the armed forces to be a world-class armed forces that is a source of national pride by 2028. What does it mean to do common things uncommonly well? It can be as simple as this. A mess sergeant is tasked to cook for his fellow soldier, let's say the normal pinakbet. But when his recipe includes a healthy helping of effort, a dose of his love for his job, a soldier might come up to him and say, "Sarge, ang sarap ng pinakbet." And perhaps on occasions, a mess sergeant adds a sprinkling of bagnet. The soldier might say, "Wow, Sarge, ibang level yung pinakbet ngayon." By enhancing the flavor of an ordinary dish, the mess sergeant transforms the pinakbet into a culinary experience for the soldier. More than just filling up an empty stomach, he gave pleasure to an often tired soldier. It is along the spirit that I call each member of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, every officer, soldier, airman, sailor, and marine, as well as our civilian human resource, to always give more than what is expected of you. Season our efforts with a timely reminder of the core reasons why we chose the noble profession of arms. If each of us do common things uncommonly well every day, it will become a way of life, automatic and instinctive. It will become second nature. The collective effect on the AFP will be transformative. The effect on the accomplishment of our mission will be nothing short of being excellent and awesome. My mantra, do common things uncommonly well, was born out of the advice of my father that he gave to me many years ago. Do your best, but make sure your best counts. Your best makes a difference. As I take the helm of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, my father's words hold special significance. First, he makes his presence felt even if he is not with us today. And more importantly, his words constitute a vow I make to myself and to you, Mr. President, and to all the members of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, and of course, to the Philippine people. I will do my best as the Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces of the Philippines. And as I make that commitment, let me silently whisper to the men and women of the Armed Forces of the Philippines that my best can only be meaningful with help from each of you. I will count on both your individual and collective contributions. Together, our best will make a difference in the Armed Forces of the Philippines and in the lives of our countrymen. Together, let us have a firm resolve to remain as one AFP, faithful to our constitutional duty as protector of the people and the state. Together, we can make a difference. At sa aming mga kababayan, kami po, ang inyong sandatahang lakas, ay nangangakong maglilingkod ng buong katapatan at ng walang pag-imbot. Mabuhay ang sandatahang lakas ng Pilipinas, mabuhay ang bansang Pilipinas, at mabuhay po tayong lahat. Thank you.
Thank you to the new Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, Lieutenant General Bartolome Vicente Orpilla Bacarro of Philippine Army.
Sampanaw! Stop!
At this point, the presiding officer will be introduced by the Honorable Sara Z. Duterte Carpio, Vice President, Republic of the Philippines.
I request everyone to please rise. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome with a warm round of applause the President of the Republic of the Philippines, Ferdinand Romualdez Marcos Jr.
Troop Commander, kindly give the order to our troops of Tikas Pahinga.
Tikas! Up!
Thank you very much, Vice President Sara Zimmerman Duterte, House Speaker Ferdinand Martin Romualdez, Department of National Defense, Officer in Charge, Senior Undersecretary Jose Faustino Jr., the outgoing AFP Chief of Staff, General Andres Centino, the incoming Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Bartolome Vicente Bacarro, Medal of Valor awardees who are here present today, officers, enlisted men and women, and civilian employees of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, all our other distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. This afternoon is special as we become witnesses to a historic tradition that has long been undertaken by the Armed Forces of the Philippines each time a new president is elected to lead the country. It is the change of command of the outgoing leadership of the AFP in the person of General Andres Centino, the 57th Chief of Staff of the AFP, will give way now to the incoming and the 58th Chief of Staff, Lieutenant Bartolome Vicente Orpilla Bacarro. Also called the changing of the guards. It is a sacred military ritual and ceremony that symbolizes consistency and continuity in service, complementing the democratic way of turning over the helm of authority from one administration to the next. And like all military traditions, the solemnity of the occasion is treated with great respect and sensitivity as it has always been. It is the perfect time to convey my utmost gratitude to General Centino for his exemplary service that he rendered as he faithfully executed the mandate of his office during the entirety of his tenure. He has been a source of national pride. General Centino's unwavering commitment to excellence and duty was duly recognized through the various awards and decorations that he has received through his professional career. 4 Distinguished Service Stars, Gold, Silver, and Bronze Cross Medals, CSAFP Commendation Medal and Ribbon, Long Service Medal, numerous merit medals for combat and administration, several certificates of commendation from both the military and civilian sectors of society. And most notably, in his capacity as the 57th Chief Commander of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, he has been awarded the prestigious Philippine Legion of Honor for his professional competence and firm resolve to maximize the AFP score competence, focusing on operational efficiency, internal security, delivery of basic services, and the optimal use of our resources. As a public servant who stood for meritocracy, professionalism, and accountability, he effectively managed the AFP by giving special credence and substance to competence, fair play, and justice in dealing with the ranks. Qualified personnel were selected for promotion. The placement of senior officers to key positions was deliberated upon. The AFP rotation policy was judiciously implemented. These were the guiding policies used to ensure good governance, and in so doing, effectively strengthen the AFP as a public institution that can last the test of time. He is a true patriot, a valiant soldier, an accomplished officer, a committed leader, an exemplary public servant. To General Centino, much respect and admiration for all that you have done. Thank you for your excellent service. A well-deserved round of applause for the outgoing Chief of Staff, General Andres Centino. And as we bid farewell to General Centino, it is now time to welcome the incoming Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, Lieutenant General Bartolome Vicente Orpilla Bacarro. A graduate of PMA Maringal class of 1988, he has held various command and staff positions, starting with platoon commander, company commander, administrative officer, intelligence officer, operations officer, civil military operations officer, and secretary to the general staff. Holding the rank of captain, he became the administrative officer at the Office of the Deputy Chief of Staff and Office of the Vice Chief of Staff of the AFP. And there are many, many more. As an Army lieutenant, serving as a commanding officer at the 6th CAA Company, 21st Battalion, 5th Infantry Division, he was initially deployed in Isabela at the height of the counterinsurgency campaign in the Cagayan Valley that lasted until 1995. It was this tour of duty that earned him his Medal of Valor in December 1991, the highest award for military combat in the AFP. Acts of courage and gallantry were abundantly shown during a 10-hour encounter with 150 fully armed New People's Army insurgents who surreptitiously attacked the town of Macunaco in Isabela in February 1991. He was fearless in combat, and at the risk of life above and beyond the call of duty, he took on the most formidable foes, faced them head-on, and eventually emerged triumphant through sheer determination and courage. In 2014, he became the Chief of Staff of the Army's 4th Infantry Diamond Division. In 2015, he served as the Army's Assistant Chief of Staff for Operations. From 2016 to 2018, he became Commander of the 502nd Brigade, 5th ID, Philippine Army, and eventually the Commandant of the PMA before he assumed the position of AFP Internal Auditor from October 2020 to April 2021. In the course of his career, numerous awards and commendations have been received, recognizing his exceptional performance of duty in both operational and administrative assignments. Aside from the coveted Medal of Valor, he also received 5 Distinguished Service Stars, 1 Silver Cross Medal, 2 Bronze Cross Medals, and 2 Silver Wing Medals, 9 Combat Commanders Kagitingan Badges, and 36 Military Merit Medals. The PMA Outstanding Alumnus Award in 1998, among others. In his capacity as Commander, Southern Luzon Command, Armed Forces of the Philippines, from July to September 2022, he was likewise given the award of the Philippine Legion of Honor. It is certain that we have chosen the right leader in General Bacarro to lead the AFP as it marches forward and undertakes a new journey that would eventually pave the way for a much improved and stronger AFP in the days ahead. I am sure that we will all now know that we have a reliable partner in the AFP under the helm of General Bacarro as we commence the difficult undertaking of rebirth and restoration of the Republic, transforming the country into a haven that is safe, secure, peaceful, and prosperous for all, present and future Filipinos to enjoy. This has been long overdue. It is time to get to work and be the best that we can be in our respective capacities as public servants united in purpose and in deed. As we look and think about a world that is constantly changing, a world wrought with conditions and situations that are hard to predict, a world full of elements and forces that can wreak havoc on its domain, the kind of leadership that you possess, the strong presence, the administrative and operational proficiency, unmatched discipline, and unwavering commitment will come in useful for the work that you are facing ahead of you. I know that you know well that the journey will not be an easy one. It will be sometimes treacherous, always complex. It will be difficult and at times seemingly unbearable. But with the AFP beside us, assisting in putting in place the fundamental prerequisites for nation building, we shall overcome and emerge victorious in the end. Together, a meaningful change in the lives of many can be realized. I know it can be done, and that is why we shall. Muli, maraming salamat General Centino at Lieutenant General Bacarro sa tapat at walang sawang paglilingkod sa bayan at mamamayang Pilipino. My hat goes off to both of you. Maraming salamat sa inyong lahat at magandang hapon po sa inyo. Mabuhay ang Pilipinas.
Pinuno.
Thank you very much, President Ferdinand Romualdez Marcos Jr.
Samparaw. Da!
Please be seated. A memento will be presented to His Excellency Ferdinand Romualdez Marcos Jr. We'd like now to request the new Chief of Staff, Armed Forces of the Philippines, Lieutenant General Bartolome Vicente O. Bacarro, to present the coat of arms. Thank you, sirs.
We shall now proceed with the pass in review.
Kakalpunan. Lingkod ko. Kad. Asa. Masid.
sa kanon! Rap! Rap sa kanon! Rap! Sa kanang balikat! Ta! Sa kanang balikat! Ta! Talu-talupad! Unang talupad! Pasulong! God!
We'd like to request General Centino, sir, to please proceed down the grandstand for the final review. Today, a cliche as they call it, is what everybody feels as we bid farewell to yet another military leader whose contribution and role in the armed forces of the Philippines have been a vital one. General Andres Centino, Philippine Army. As General Centino steps down his post, he is assured that his successor, Lieutenant General Bartolome Vicente O. Bacarro, will continue what he had worked on and even make the armed forces of the Philippines soar towards greater achievements. To our honoree, General Centino, sir, the officers, men and women and civilian personnel of the armed forces of the Philippines, proudly wish you all the best. Congratulations, more power and Godspeed.
Ladies and gentlemen, the various contingents of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, ang mga makabagong katipunero, makadiyos, makakalikasan, makatao at makabansa. Leading the parading contingent is Major General Nestor Florente D.C. Rayos. His staff, Colonels Lee Sarpamones, Thomas Ryan Seguin, John G. Tison, and Nolito Kemi. Following, the troop commander and staff is the AFP Composite Band under the baton of Captain Peterson de Vera. The 1st Brigade is headed by Commodore Roy Vincent Trinidad. His staff, Lieutenant Colonels John Paul Alfredo Gopela, Jonathan Barawed, Adonis Arco, and Agrifino Poblete, and Commander Orlando Miranda. We now have the battalion from the General Headquarters, led by Lieutenant Colonel Conrado Yabut, his staff, Majors Evelmente Malano, Alan Estoque, Vincent Kimayong, and Jomar Cañazares. These officers and men of the General Headquarters and Headquarters Service Command share the popular concern in the sanctity of the constitutional processes and the safeguarding of individual liberties. They are the soldiers at the forefront of securing the Armed Forces of the Philippines Headquarters and the National Capital Region. Following is the Philippine Army contingent represented by the Security and Escort Battalion under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Jamal Bonza, his staff, Majors Alhamza Kuwit, Ron Michael Soriao, and Fabian Rani Jr., and Captain Michael Ignario. The Philippine Army, as it performs good governance, embarked on transformation program that placed emphasis on the change in paradigm. The Army Transformation Roadmap 2028 that received various recognition. The Gold Trailblazer Award in 2014, an Island of Good Governance in 2015, and in 2018 awarded the Palladium Balanced Scorecard Hall of Fame and thereby recognized as a world-class in strategy execution and management. The Philippine Army has been a beacon of hope and progress and lighting the path for other Philippine institutions to follow as it preaches governance and addresses outside pressures with integrity, courage, and perseverance. The Philippine Army, serving the people, securing the land. The audience is requested to rise for the passing of the colors. Thank you. The guests may be seated. Following is the mass scholars representing the different major services and AFP-wide separate and support units of the Armed Forces of the Philippines. Before you is the 2nd Brigade, commanded by Brigadier General Cirilo Balauro Jr. His staff, Lieutenant Colonels Agustin Matib, Randel Medina, Emerson Banadera, and Mayo Malyari, and Commander Alexandre Orio. Following are the protectors of the Philippine seas in the first line of defense to uphold our territorial integrity, the Philippine Navy. The battalion is under Commander Manuel Zapanta Jr. The Navy secures our territorial waters and conducts sea lift operations in support of our troops, performs mercy missions, rescue and relief operations during calamities, and protects our marine resources and environment. The Philippine Navy has come a long way since it began its transformation. It has been recognized for its significant accomplishments and received the prestigious Palladium Award during the Palladium Summit 2017 in London, United Kingdom. The Philippine Navy is the first national agency to receive such award. Following are the Angels of Mercy and the Guardians of the Philippine Skies, the Air Force Battalion led by Lieutenant Colonel Jefferson Guerra, his staff, Majors Alexander Ilagan, Knight Ace Diamond Manlulu, Napoleon Blessed Anteja III, and Vargas Vargas. Time and again, the Philippine Air Force has proven to be a potent military force, primarily for the protection of the Filipino people and the country's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Thus, considering these roles, the Philippine Air Force focused on its transformation towards becoming a more capable and credible Air Force that is responsive to national security and development. This vision, as envisaged in the Philippine Air Force Flight Plan 2028, with a planned velocity conceptualized with the ultimate objective of providing a portfolio of strategic initiatives, of course, will deliver the capability and credibility at top speed as required in the flight plan.
Ladies and gentlemen, you have just seen a segment of your armed forces pass before you. These soldiers represent our brothers and sisters out there in the field, defending our freedom and independence, as well as our democratic institutions. The Troop Commander, Major General Nestor Florante D.C. Rayos, will now report the termination of this afternoon's ceremony.
Mga pinuno, to. Ginoo, tapos na po ang parangal.
Ladies and gentlemen, once again, a big hand of applause for General Andres Centino, Philippine Army.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, at this point, we end this testimonial review in honor of General Andres Centino and the AFP's change of command ceremony. We would like to remind everyone to remain seated until the President has left the grandstand. Well, on behalf of the new Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, Lieutenant General Bartolome Vicente O. Bacarro, the officers, men and women, and civilian workforce of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, thank everyone for gracing the ceremony. Meantime, we'd like to request the Major Service Commanders, Unified Commanders, and Joint Staff for the command conference. Well, this has been Karen Dabo of the Philippine Army, thanking everyone to honor all.
And I am Major Ferdinand Carlos Camacho. Thank you and mabuhay tayo.
Sumati nawa ang pagpapala ng ating dakilang Panginoon. Mabuhay!
Enjoyed this video? Hit the like button and share with your friends. Also, subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. Thanks for watching.